Kwaba, welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is the first program of Season 2 of Mwalimu, Dropping the Knowledge. We are exploring the theme of connections. Connections will be a thread that will define and illuminate the episodes of Season 2. Our connections include all of humanity. It has been scientifically proven through anthropology and archaeology that humanity began on the continent of Africa. Consequently, this history belongs to all of humanity, no matter the hue of skin, color of eyes, texture of hair, or country of birth. All humans have African DNA running through our veins, whether we accept it or not. It is one of the reasons knowledge of this history is imperative in order to change the trajectory of relationships in the society and in the world. We are all African, so let me personally invite you to embrace this knowledge that is being shared. Our connections encompass all aspects of life, spiritually, historically, culturally. Because African people are a deeply spiritual people, that no doubt facilitated our strength, resilience, and determination. I'm starting there, but let me add a disclaimer before I begin. African people have always known God, and this information is not in any way a commentary about the religious practices we currently embrace. We invented religion. But before the advent of religion as we know it, African people pondered the universe, ways of knowing the divine, and the fundamental questions of life. The questions of life are the foundations for what we know today as philosophy. Philosophy asks the questions of life. Who am I? Who is God? What is my purpose? These are a few of the questions that all people ask and answer from their own historical and cultural perspective. As the first people to live on the earth, again proven through the sciences of anthropology and archaeology, African people asked, pondered, and answered those questions from their own perspectives. While my intention is to drop some knowledge on an area we generally don't learn about, I also hope to motivate and inspire you with the level of ethical excellence and spiritual rootedness that our African ancestors lived by and aspired to. So let me say it again. African people have always known God. God the creator, God the sustainer, God the deliverer, God the good. The classical civilization of Kemet, also known as ancient Egypt, rose in power and splendor based on a value system that was lived and aspired to by the entire country. Kemet means land of the blacks, or black land, and was an ancient African civilization located not in the mythical Middle East, but on the continent of Africa. The spiritual beliefs of Kemet represent the best of African philosophical deep thought, and the practice of Ma'at is a reflection of universal values, morality, and ethics. Simply stated, Ma'at means truth, justice, harmony, righteousness, balance, order, and reciprocity. The extensive teachings of Ma'at can be found in a number of ancient books, including the Husia, Sacred Wisdom of Ancient Egypt, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, and the teachings of Ptah Hotep. Ma'at is the highest expression of Kemetic excellence in moral and ethical living. Ma'at was the core value for proper governance in the lives and times of the people of ancient Egypt. It remains the foundational cornerstone for ethical, moral, and religious education today, even when we don't know it. The value principles found in Ma'at are a key part of many religious beliefs, including Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith among them. As an educator, I taught the basic concept of Ma'at as guideposts for living that lead to a good and productive life. The idea of practical application of Ma'at, again, truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, order, and reciprocity, is consistent with the values most people learn and teach their children, whether it is the difference between right and wrong or as a component of religious education. Again, Ma'at established a standard for correct living with the goal of practical application. As a code of conduct, all Kemetic citizens were expected to study, learn, and practice Ma'at as a way of life. Ma'at's core concern was the quality of relationships between people governed by their knowledge of God. That is, the relationship between God and individuals, families, communities, and the state. It was all about being in right relationship with God and being governed accordingly. Sound familiar? There's a lot more to share about Ma'at. In particular, the 42 laws of Ma'at and their connection to the Christian 10 Commandments. But that is information that requires a class where context and discussion yield needed understanding. Speaking of Christianity, the Black church in the diaspora is an extension and reflection of the strong connections to the divine our ancestors relied upon. In fact, the first institution Africans in the United States established was the church. In 1773, George Lill and Andrew Bryan organized First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. In 1787, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones organized the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, after being forced off their praying knees. In Bermuda, the desire for Black people to worship was discouraged. A law was enacted preventing Black people, whether free or enslaved, from being baptized in 1687. 110 years later, an Irish Methodist missionary was imprisoned for 6 months for preaching to Black people in Bermuda. Believing enslaved Blacks were indeed human, Methodist Joshua Marston began preaching and holding services in an integrated church in 1808. Since Bermuda was firmly in the grip of the slaveocracy, Marston had to overcome the vexation of whites and the government. It wasn't until 1825 that enslaved Africans toiled by moonlight to build Cobb's Hill Methodist Chapel. Completed in 1827, it still stands and functions today. The establishment of churches was not only a reflection of our connection to the divine, but also an act of resistance to the oppression that was the bane of our ancestors' existence. During the 60s, Black churches were citadels of resistance. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, established in 1957, is probably the quintessential example, known primarily through the organization's first president and notable leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In Bermuda, people of faith were also instrumental in securing freedoms taken for granted today. While there will be a future episode exploring and illuminating the connections of church and resistance, this episode would not be complete without mentioning this essential connection. We'll be right back.